Welcome back to BaldHeaded Metal, guys. Today we got a special guest. We got Belakor in the house, and we got Steve from Belakor. Keyboard, synth, piano, all the keyboarding stuff that you're gonna hear on the albums comes from Steve. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the interview, man. Thanks for doing this.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I'm gonna start with the most obvious question that I can possibly have here. Is I looked up. I'm trying to look up the name Belakor when you guys got it from, and apparently it came from a Warhammer Fantasy reference of a character. Is that true, or it was some kind of other meaning to it?
No, it is true. So we started as a band 17 years ago, 2004-ish. And so, that was sort of uni days for us. And I think a couple of the guys, at least two of the guys, maybe three of them played Warhammer at the time. And so I remember going to George's place, one day, and we had no name at that point, and it was suggested as an option. And I think we kind of liked the word. It's a cool looking word. It sounded nice. I think it's a bit sort of unique. But then obviously as the years have gone on, I don't think many of us or any of us have played the game for a long time now, but it's we've got the name now. It's our name, so we'll go with it. But I think it's, at least it's a bit unique out there in the scene.
You know what was funny? One of the fans on the comments pointed something out. That was his question, and he wanted to know where the name came from. But he also said, "Do they know that the name Belakor in French is actually a play on words, and it translates to a beautiful chord or a beautiful riff?" Which I think
we heard that. Yeah, someone
that?
told us that early on, which was nice to hear. That it had, obviously, the sound of the name had another meaning. It was kind of cool. But yeah, it does. We see it pop up. Obviously, people. Probably the biggest thing is pronunciation. Like sometimes people won't quite know how to say the word when they see it. We say Belakor, but yeah, it's a funny one.
That's cool, and I think it's very fitting too. A beautiful riff is something I would agree with, especially when I was listening to all of Vessels. Like, holy shit! It's like,
yeah, there's certainly a lot of riffs. We try to make them more beautiful, but we do pack in the riffs.
yeah. So it's cool. I was gonna, yeah, you actually also answered another question. I was like, and you guys were like nerds playing D&D and Warhammer, and it looks like it was the case, which is I think a
Yeah,
case with a lot of metalheads, right?
yeah, we're probably not the coolest bunch of guys going around. And that's probably one of the reasons that we are how we are. Like we like to focus on the lyrics and the music and tuck ourselves away in our houses and work on the creative side of the band. It's kind of one of our big hobbies. So yeah, it's a funny one.
I always believed that heavy metal was very much outsiders music, and if the definition of cool is not always been the metalhead, but it's also kind of unleashed their creativity and who they are. People, somebody you wouldn't typically see. They're not the typical musician, you so to say, back in the 80s and 70s when all these bands coming out, and then all this talent came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think metal's actually, like, if you took all the genres of music out there, metal and certainly some subgenres of metal are sort of the thinking person's music, I would say. So I would say melodic death metal is one of those areas where you get, I guess, some of those more introspective people, and you'll see it at metal shows. Like a lot of when you do meet fans or other people in the scene, they're often pretty quietly spoken and sort of deep in thought about something usually. So I'd say it's a theme through the scene.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. And what was you mentioned lyrics. One of the questions that was probably asked the most is something you said, you guys focus a lot on the lyrics. Where do you guys get inspiration for the lyrics? And the second kind of part to the question, who writes most of the lyrics?
The lyrics, so George and I shared that job. We probably write about half each, like on Coherence. Yeah, but pretty much 50-50 split of lyric writing, and it was the same on Vessels. So it's George and I that write the lyrics, and the inspiration comes from various places. Obviously, nature is a big theme. Like Vessels is all about, it's all set in nature, and it's sort of a lot of plants and animals and that sort of space and stuff like that. History is a big part of it. Mythology sometimes plays a part. Science, yeah, but we tend to try to write lyrics that, if possible, are not set in a particular place or at any particular time. They're kind of timeless stories that anyone can identify with, and we like to explore the ideas that we find interesting, and that sort of changes a little bit album to album. But there's definitely a theme there, and people who have read our lyrics would spot some similar kind of things that crop up along the way.
And what I was going to ask also is kind of what is the process? For me, that's always been the interesting part, always wanting to know, actually getting to talk to different bands and different things, is the process of writing music. Because it's so different. Certain bands, sometimes just one person writes all the music. Sometimes it's a collaborative process.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's a discussion I've been having with a bunch of the people, is that I felt like it must have been a collaborative process as of you guys kind of coming together to write the music, or is it a particular person who kind of focuses?
It's highly collaborative. I think I would say it's quite a democratic process, the way we work. So everyone's free to write riffs and come up with ideas, and people do. I think, again, it tends to be George and I that probably bring more than some of the other guys, but that's the initial phase. And then we come together as a group and hang out at someone's house for half a day, as once a week or twice a week, whenever we can. And it really is then about like bringing riffs to the table, talking about them. People might hear something in a riff that others hadn't heard, for example. Often if I'm bringing something in, it was written maybe not always on a piano, like it might just be kind of on a computer. Like I use this old program called Modplug, and it's very retro, but it doesn't limit me to thinking even what instrument it'll be written on or played on. It's just kind of melodies.
Yeah.
So you bring that in, and George might be like, oh, I can hear that working on piano, or I can hear that working on guitar. There's a lot of that. John's always been fantastic at connecting riffs, creating sort of interesting takes on riffs and taking things in a place we hadn't imagined when we wrote the chorus idea. Sean's huge with leads and bringing harmonies and a lot of really cool effects. He's obviously, the lead work in our songs is sort of quite effect heavy in many places. So, and Elliot, since he's joined the band 5 years ago, he has been hugely involved in sort of not only the drumming, but the sound and his impressions of that. So very, very democratic. It's good.
Honestly speaking, the reason I said I felt like it was like that is when I only heard the full album was Vessels. And the reason I'm stretching it out is because, a lot of people want to see a full album reaction sometimes, like just how a person reacts to it on the first try. And the way I felt the music was written, it had to be a collaborative process because he just goes so many different ways and does so many different things. And for me, a lot of times when I listen to even my favorite band, Exodus, they'll be like, it feels like, oh, this is a cool riff here. Oh, this is a cool riff here. Whereas I believe in Belakor, everything flows almost like a symphony.
It's definitely it's a focus we have, like especially on Coherence, because on Vessels, I mean, we used to, when we started, have a band room that we would play in twice a week at least, for several hours at a time, and a lot of that kind of happens the more you play songs. On Vessels, it was harder to do that. We had, I think, one of us was overseas for quite a while, and it was harder to jam the songs. In Coherence, we really spent hours together. Once the songs were written, we had this other sort of round of time to play them together. And you're right, like there's riffs in some songs that I would never be able to write, and like they're not my style of writing. But when they come in as a group, it makes the music a bit more diverse, I think.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to be looking forward to checking out Coherence too. It's going to be one of my later questions that I'll plug in there as well. And then what I was going to ask, another one is, what kind of bands have influenced you guys? Because personally, the ones I've heard, maybe I could be wrong here, is Tool, Pink Floyd, like Green Carnation, Dark Tranquility, Opeth, even Death. I would say there's moments of those kinds of bands. But what would you say kind of was the inspiration for you guys to kind of kick off Belakor?
Yeah, definitely some of those bands. Like when we started, it probably was In Flames, Dark Tranquility, Opeth was the big 3 for us. Maybe At the Gates, because this is going back like nearly 20 years. So when we started, they were the big bands we looked up to, and they were definitely melodic death metal bands. And so Opeth has remained, I would say, the biggest one for us, like in terms of their classic first 6 albums. We sort of worship those albums as listeners, but then it's diversified, I'd say, in the past 5 to 10 years, what we listen to as people. And it's like, for me, it was Agalloch, Alcest, A Forest of Stars, some of that sort of slightly more atmospheric stuff. I think Elliot listens hugely broadly. George as well probably has a slightly heavier leaning, like he'll go for some of the more brutal stuff sometimes, and also the more atmospheric and creative stuff sometimes. John listens to a lot of electronic music, and he's sort of big on melody. And then Sean, probably going back to when we started, his other big influences were things like Iron Maiden and Metallica. So you'll probably hear earlier albums, there's a fair bit of stuff that sounds quite Iron Maiden and Metallica in the lead work. But if you bring all of that together, then you get kind of, I guess, what we feel are the best, most interesting parts of metal. So even when like Gojira came along, we were quite excited with some of the stuff that they were doing. Animals as Leaders, I listened to a bit of Animals as Leaders and really like that, but we're never going to sound like that, but you can take little ideas from that. So I think there's a fair bit of that going on. And I mean, even Queen, Beach Boys, old melodic music that is all about harmonies and melodies has always been massive for us. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a difference between being inspired by something and just copying something, and that's what I think you got. You guys were just inspired to kick this off and have it in the back of your mind somewhere, but you always want to develop your own sound and the way you play your own way in your music. And if it just happens to be sometimes that, oh, it sounds like a melodic death pen that I like, great. I love Belakor too now. And this, let me tell you have quite actually loyal and hardcore fans. Thankfully, I liked your music right off the bat because I feel like they would have shredded me to pieces.
I think it's I think we've been around for a long time, but we haven't sort of grown explosively. It's been steady growth. And I think you're right. There are some fans that talk to us and say, well, we've been listening to you guys for, since the start, and they're still listening, which is really cool. But yeah, it's always nice if you have some people who are kind of loyal and follow you for that long. It's really cool.
Actually, asking about that question, it was another thing somebody asked. They were very interested is how is it trying to balance a band, like, you guys are growing and getting on bigger and bigger stages. I saw that you did like Summer Breeze and you did some concerts with Alistorm and all that kind of stuff. How is it balancing this idea that you have to be part-time musician, heavy metal, but also work somewhere else? How is that for? Is it difficult having that balance together?
I actually think it might be easier. I mean, obviously I would like us to have more time for the band. That would be cool. My kind of dream scenario would be a world where we all work 3 days a week and 2 days a week we meet up and write music, and we'd probably be able to put albums out every 2 to 3 years or whatever, rather than every 4 plus. But I don't really think any of us have ever wanted to do like, let's all quit our jobs, let's all tour the world full time, because it's sort of, in some ways, turns it into a job. Whereas for us, we have families and jobs and hobbies, and then Belakor is our biggest hobby and our best sort of way to hang out as friends and do something that's really fun. So I think we want to keep it that way, but obviously balance that with trying to do a few more tours, bigger tours, grow the band where we can. But it does keep it balanced, keeps it kind of healthy for us, I think.
It keeps it a passion project.
Yeah, like obviously we take it very seriously. There's a business element to it, but it's not enough that we can all quit our jobs, and we sort of reinvest any money the band makes usually back into the next album and the next tour. And it allows us to do a little bit more as we grow. But in order to quit our jobs, that would be a huge thing that would be a risk, but also may harm some of the enjoyment, I think, in the long term for us as well.
That's been kind of a reoccurring theme that I've heard from Legion of the Damned, from Ethereum that I've also got to interview, is this idea that everybody's balancing the two. And as a naive kid growing up listening to heavy metal, for some reason it was in my head, it's like, oh, that's all they do. They're just heavy metal heads and they just go tour. Like, like the 80s mentalities, like, oh, they're just partying and going from tour to tour, where the reality is a lot more simpler. And like you said, I think it might be actually a good thing.
It's funny though, because even though I'm in a band that is in that situation, like I still think of other bands the way you just described. Like I'll look at Agalok and be like, wow, they must just do Agalok. But of course, this is when they were still a band that was functioning. But even they had, I think, someone who was a professor at a university. And I do think it can help to have that balance. It's not always a bad thing.
And then to take us some of the seriousness away, talking about Australian bands, AC/DC or Jet?
AC/DC by a mile.
Great. I had a feeling you wanted to say AC/DC. It actually was really funny as I was doing research. I'm like, what other? I'm like, I can't think of Australian band. I know there's metal bands, a lot of Australian metal bands, and Bee Gees came up. I'm like, wait a minute, Bee Gees are not Australian.
No, I don't think they are. No, they're not.
But
they
had a moment where they went to Australia and they got really popular off a song. and then they became
Not
like
Staying
this.
Alive, was it?
No, it was another song. It was called like either Melbourne or Sydney. It was called Sydney.
Oh, right. I'll have to do some research on this.
So I'm like, I had to like double check myself because I'm usually pretty good at music history,
Yeah.
but it was funny. And then another question I had for you. Well, kind of already went through it. Somebody wanted to know about the full-time musician part of it, but that second part to that question somebody asked is, do you guys like make any kind of decent money from merchandise, from the album sales? Um, it kind of relates to the fact that it's still part-time for you, or that you're doing it half and half. It's like, do you make any kind of serious money from any of the things that you guys sell? Because I know with records nowadays, you don't make as much money. And that was the biggest
Yeah.
complaint about a lot of bands, is that because you don't sell physical CDs anymore, it's all streaming, it's all downloads, it's a lot less for the band that they actually earn.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, from our perspective, we probably get the biggest chunk of our income from digital these days. So, you know, on our website, we sell T-shirts and hoodies and CDs. We have to post them, obviously, which has a cost as well. Napalm, obviously, when they're able to pass on royalties through to us, but the probably the most reliable source of income actually is something like the whole collection of the streaming platforms and iTunes and Spotify. And I think because the first 3 albums we released independently, so we have this sort of, they are an income stream for us through the digital platforms. And then we get sort of 6 monthly royalty payments from Napalm for Vessels, and probably the same for Coherence. But it's a bit of a misconception, at least in our experience, that streaming is bad for bands, because it helps people discover our music.
Yeah,
and then there's also some income there, but it's not massive. And that's why we all work our jobs still. So, yeah.
And I think I would think so. Maybe I'm completely naive and wrong in this sense, is that when you look at just music, how it had to spread 20, 30 years ago, I can't imagine making it as a band in those eras. Like, you know, going literally on the street, handing your CD out, or going to these places where now, like you said, there's social media, there's YouTube, there's Spotify, there's so many avenues for you. Yes, you might be earning less, but you're spreading your message so much faster to every single corner of the world.
I mean, we would be the sort of band that pre-internet would never have had a fan base that we have now, because we've only actually toured overseas on 3 occasions. Like, we've played 10 shows overseas ever. And we plan to do a bit more in the coming years. But if you took away the internet, because we relied heavily on MySpace and YouTube early on to have any sort of growth. So I think I would say back in like the 70s, it was harder to become a known band. And once you became a known band, maybe you could make a lot of money, because there were less of them. And, you know, it was all about selling albums and probably touring. But these days, I think it's easier to develop something of a fan base that's kind of at least somewhat loyal. And it may not be massive, but the internet has made that much easier these days, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And outside of metal, what kind of bands do you personally like? Like, what are some of the bands that you kind of maybe grown up with, or that are on your like, sort of say, top list on Mount Sinai on top?
Well, when I was growing up, I listened to, I think the first bands I fell in love with were Deep Purple, Status Quo, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, basically all the 70s stuff. And I remember when I was like sort of 12, 15, I kind of was sad, because I thought there used to be bands like those bands I just listed, and now there are no more bands. There's just like pop. I didn't really know that bands were still kind of going. And then I discovered a new whole, obviously, world once I got a bit older, and there were still bands doing that sort of stuff, because the radio wasn't really playing that much heavy stuff. So those were the early bands, like Queen I mentioned before. And I do remember as a kid listening to the Beach Boys a lot, because the vocal harmonies were amazing, you know, 3-4 part harmonies. So I'd be lying there on the floor in the living room with my head next to a speaker, just kind of listening to the Beach Boys. So those sorts of things were big early on, and probably a bit of Celtic stuff, like folk music as well. My family listened to that. And I think there's a little bit of that that's come into the melodies that are in Belakor, and it's probably actually part of melodic death metal as well. Like the folk influence is definitely there too.
Yeah, I think some of the coolest bands that I've gotten to discover is when they start implementing different folk music from their countries and cultures, whether it be Celtic or there's a band actually I'm interviewing today as well that they put in Sumerian music. It's like, it's crazy how people get really creative and pulling from different sources, and everything that they've grown up with, everything they've been listening to, all just pulled into this kind of into their music.
It helps. It definitely helps. And I think it means that you're going to have a more interesting final package, I guess.
And I have to agree with you about the music. I don't mean to sound like, I mean, I'm 34 years old. I'm not that old, but I don't mean to sound like an old man when I say, oh, music back in the day. It's like, but I agree with you. There was a certain spirit of like, there's so many bands back. You would just like, holy shit, you would just go to each one. Now I feel like I have to search out and find Belakor, and I have to find Agalach and find Gojira. It's like, it's more of a search, but it's also very rewarding because now you find these guys who've grown up on the stuff that you enjoy and took it a step further, I believe.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're right. Again, because of the internet, there are more bands to search through these days. There's a proliferation of music. And so if you're looking for certain things, it might take you a while to find them. But equally, things like Spotify will actually shove them in your face and say, you might like this and you might like this. And that's one of the reasons that for us, we're actually really happy with the fact that while we're sleeping, YouTube and Spotify are sort of poking at our music in front of other people and saying, look, think about this, because I think it's a great way for us to be heard by other people.
And I think what's already happening too is on the backside of Spotify and all these guys is their algorithms and AI is getting so smart to figure out exactly what this person likes, and they'll be able to push somebody like Belakor to them faster, and they'll get to check out this band otherwise they would have never seen in the midst of all these other bands. Because I mean, for example, for me, I do research every 3 or 4 months. I sit down, I'm like, okay, so what have I missed? And I try to find a band that I haven't heard of. But not a lot of people sit down and give it time to find a new band. For me, it's like a discovery is interesting. Like, ooh, I found something I've never seen before. For a lot of people, they just like, oh, whatever comes my way, that's what I'm going to listen.
Yeah, I would like to do more of that. I used to do heaps of that. I used to basically have a rule that pretty much every week, I think it was, I needed to have a new album that I had found and was listening to, but I haven't done that lately, which that.
Yeah. And then another question I was going to ask you, when some of the tours will begin, because obviously a lot of people were asking, you know, I know in Australia right now it's kind of been a little bit difficult. Somebody mentioned from Melbourne, they're saying that there hasn't been any live performances there in the past 18 months. And the question was, how is it for a band with zero amount of touring going on right now? And then the second part of that question is, when will the touring begin for Australia, North America, Europe, and that kind of sort?
Look, Australia has been unlucky and lucky. I think we've been lucky to have had not many cases compared to other parts of the world. But obviously the governments here have been very strict about managing people's movements to keep everyone safe. So yeah, I've had a lot of lockdowns here, like 18 months I've been sort of just at home doing band and then working from home. So Melbourne's been like that, and obviously for bands who tour a lot and rely on being really hard. Again, we haven't relied on the shows to be our source of income primarily, but we're ready to go. We're keen to get out there. I know Sean's texting so every second day to talk about the rehearsing and they're getting ready for the tours, because he gets really excited about that. So, and that makes sense because, you know, he probably, recording the album for Sean takes a little bit less time maybe than other people. He comes in and does these leads, and then some time passes. He's just itching to get out there and play some shows. So I think the plan is Australia when we can. It was going to be October of this year, but it'll be, I'm guessing, into next year now, and then followed by our first US tour, because we've never been to America, and then Europe again, hopefully with a headline tour. So we're working with Napalm Events to sort of plan out those tours now, and we're very, very keen to make it happen.
Hopefully you guys come to New York. That'd be really cool.
I think we would have to. If we're in America, we're going to have to.
It's one of the major places to come out to. Well, in that case, I'll be there.
Yeah, that's awesome. That'd be great.
And then another one I had was what kind of things can we expect from Coherence? Maybe is there going to be something new that we don't expect? Some kind of a new element, something that you've been working on? And also people asked if there's going to be more singles released, which as soon as I wrote this question, I came to the morning and I started doing this, I'm like, oh shit, you announced that you're gonna have another single from Coherence that's gonna come out a little bit later, right?
Yeah, there'll be a single. I think the album comes out the 29th of October, and there'll be a single a day or two before that, and that's kind of to help launch the actual album. And in terms of what to expect, I think with Vessels, we tried hard to make it different in some ways. We actively talked about, okay, let's try some new things a little bit. With Coherence, it felt a bit more organic and natural, and we still tried some new things, but it was more just what happened when we made the album. And so it's in some ways feels to me like it's a collection of the best aspects of our past three albums. Like it's got, in some ways, a feeling of Stone's Reach and of Breath and Bone, but we've kept some of those atmospheric elements that Vessels tried to focus on. But it just, yeah, it's come together in a way that's felt fairly natural. And I think any sort of Belakor fan should find things that they like, but hopefully a couple of little surprises along the way too.
I've also was really surprised how melodic the album was, Vessels. Not that, I mean, I know it's melodic death metal, and that sounds kind of stupid to say, but I didn't expect it to be that. I don't know. It was beautiful. Like I would say, especially listening to songs like "Withering Strands," that blew me away. That particular song just completely blew me away.
Well, we've sometimes been accused of being. I remember early on, we were called too melodic or like cheesy. But we don't think we can stop doing that. Like that's what we do and what we like to do. And so the trick is to try to not be cheesy. So obviously, as the keyboard player, I've always had a really big no factor to cheese. Like no big keyboard leads, nothing that I think is cheesy because I really dislike that. So we've started using more piano, I guess, real type piano sounds and things that can feel a bit more weighty and serious and not give us that cheesy feel. But yeah, melodies are huge for us, and we'll always be wanting to be as melodic as we can be within reason.
Then you mentioned the piano part. It's something that I said actually during the whole Vessels thing, is that typically when I've listened to metal bands, whether it be symphonic metal, melodic metal, they put kind of keyboards a little bit to the back. And it's almost just to create atmosphere and to create a mood, but it's not a leading instrument. Even for like something like Nightwish. It's like in Nightwish, Tomas, he's the leader of the band. He's the one that fronts the band, but he's a little bit in the back. He's kind of like hanging out. Whereas I believe the piano here, I actually like the fact that it's a real piano and it's front and center. I think it only adds to the music and makes it better.
Yeah, and obviously the key is then to not do it too much. Obviously, pick your moments, and then the piano can be a feature in that moment, rather than just chucking it here and there and everywhere to be adding atmosphere for the fun of it. I think it's important to be selective, but I agree. I think it's good to have that approach for things like the piano. And I've always tried to make that the case, especially the last couple of albums with Belakor.
And then what would you say is your most single proudest moment with Belakor as of the moment?
Probably, I mean, the most exciting moment for us was when we were sort of out of the blue. I think an email came through inviting us to play Summer Breeze in 2010. And we had never left the country before as a band. And we'd never really thought about playing a festival in Europe before. So that was really quite exciting at the time, obviously, to get that out of the blue. And then we had to say, well, what are we going to do? Like we need to plan a tour. We need to make this happen. And then doing that obviously helped us to get some follow-up tours in Europe. And I think Napalm Records, those things came out of that as well for us. But that was, I would say, the single most kind of random and exciting thing that we were then like really proud of. And of course we were proud of the fact that I think we were like an 11 o'clock, like the second band of the day when we went there in 2010 on a very hot morning. And the fact that there were some people that came to watch us, and a reasonable number, I guess, was what we heard. The feedback was it was actually a reasonable number at 11 o'clock in the morning. So we were quite proud of that, to have some people in Germany that wanted to see us at the time.
And did you get to hang out with Alistorm at all?
We have played with Alistorm in Melbourne once, I believe, just once. And it was a sold out show. It was a big show. And I think we hung out with them briefly, but not a lot, because obviously it's, whenever you do play with an international band, they've got a very busy schedule. For them, it's just one of their mini shows and they just want to get on with their job. So we've tried to stay out of their hair when we can, but they're a funny band, definitely a funny band to play with.
They seem to be just kind of loose heads and just having so much fun and kind of going crazy there.
In some ways, they're the opposite of us. You know, we're a serious bunch sometimes, and we're kind of we're not party animals compared to Alistorm. So I think if we hung out with them, they would not have been impressed with our ability to party and keep up with them.
Yeah. And then what kind of things do you, I mean, besides like obviously Belakor and everything, what do you guys do to just relax? Like, what do you do to relax when you're not writing the music and obviously not just working? What do you do to relax?
Pretty normal stuff like sport. We watch or play some sport. Like I like to watch Australian football that's played here. You know, meditation is that something that I'm big on. But like, you know, I mean, these days, 3 of the guys have got young families, keeping them very busy. So there's a lot of, you know, family time, normal things that people do in their life. And then I think gaming used to be a bigger thing for us. I think John and George and Sean, you know, early days we're quite big on some gaming and stuff like that. But again, these days it may be a bit less so. So it's probably been replaced by Netflix, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm a gamer myself and recently just married. So I imagine in the future it's going to be a very similar road for me as well, where it becomes less about you and more about your family.
Yeah, exactly. Just normal life. But personally for me, music's a big kind of hobby. So even when I'm not doing Belakor, I'm doing other things like writing music for myself. That's a hobby, trying to get out in nature. Like I do like to go for long drives or walks in nature. And in Australia, obviously our summers get really hot. So, and I don't like that. I mean, I'd rather that we'd been a European based band and stuff to enjoy the weather, but
just a little bit got stuck. It's fine now.
I've noticed that
we've returned.
We've returned. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. It's I'm surprised our connection is this good, to be honest. Between Australia and New York, it's usually it gets finicky really quick. And I got one more question for you.
Sure.
And this is not really a question. It's more of a way to kind of close out. And this has been said again in the comments. I mean, I don't get thousands of comments yet, but still, as I'm reading one person managing the comments, I'm like, holy shit, this is coming up a lot. And it's people just wanted to let you know is how much they really love every single one of your albums and how much they love the band, how excited they are for the new album, and how much they've been like, I just haven't gotten a chance to react to some of the new songs yet just because of time. Like literally. And they're like, you have to react to Foothold. You have to, like, they're super excited. So it's one thing they've all wanted you to know personally, because they know you're still growing and could be, I guess it could be difficult to gauge where you're at, is how much they love Belakor and waiting for new stuff and waiting to buy the new album and check it out.
That is really awesome. That's awesome. I mean, we do try our best to kind of engage, you know, reply to things on social media, and we get a sense of that, which is always amazing and appreciated. Like I do, that's another thing I'm proud of, I guess, like in terms of the fact that you say, what are we proud of? It's just the fact that we've been able to do something we enjoy for ourselves initially. And then, wow, there are people who like this. And over the years, some of them, you start to recognize their names and actually realize it's having a meaningful, positive effect for some people out there in their lives. And that's something I'm pretty proud of as well, because we didn't really expect that. So it's great that it's been able to work out that way.
And I'll tell you one thing, I'm a harsh critic by nature. And if you see some of my other reactions to other bands, I've said something very politely. I've never, like, for example, I've never ever shit on any band because I can imagine how hard it is already just to get together and write something. But I'm also, doesn't mean I automatically have to accept everything. And there's quite a lot of bands I'm like, this seems fake to me. When I said this out loud, and I almost got destroyed for this, I'm like, I thought Children of Bodom was kind of a little bit on the poppy side, and I thought people were gonna destroy me. But I'm like, hey, let's me voice. What the thing with Belakor from the beginning for me is I felt very, very genuine energy from the music, and this is exactly what you wanted to do in the way that you want to do it. And for me, that's one of the things that I think I gravitated towards automatically, because maybe on a personal level and on emotional, non-logical level, I felt that as well, and it was just more attractive to me in terms of the music.
I think that's cool to hear because we have a sort of a radar for wanting to not do things for artificial reasons. Like, I think that's important. So I think if you're hearing that, that's very great to know that it's kind of coming through. I think Coherence, I feel even better about from that respect. Like, I think it has felt easier and more natural this time, and I'm really happy with the album. So I think hopefully I'll be keen to see what your thoughts are. You can be honest, and if you don't like it,
100%.
make sure you say so.
I was very surprised. I said one thing about Legion of the Damned, which I like the band. I like the band, but I said something about the vocalist, and he ended up responding to me. He's like, "I like your criticism. I actually agree with you. I do need to improve my singing." Yeah. I was just like the whole time, like, like I didn't want to make it sound like I did it. And I was like, no, I agree with you. I think you said the right thing.
That's good. It's good that he's like, open to some constructive feedback.
Because you know what it is? I feel like some fans, when you voice your opinion, they're like, "Well, why are you to say anything about them? You're not a musician." I'm like, "Well, guys, it's just an opinion. You don't like it, you could just click off."
Yeah, it's one of the things we laugh about. Like, you've got to be prepared for the fact that people will have vastly different views and it's subjective. Like, I think it's quite silly when you see fans arguing with each other about best album or best band or that's because it's totally subjective. But even with our songs, like, people will disagree about which songs are the best, or like, it's all subjective.
Yeah. And once again, man, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you coming out. I know the fans are going to be excited. I'll post this. I'll let you know. You can let me know if any link you want me to post on this channel. I will do it for you. And once you guys come to New York, like I said, I'm going to be there.
Awesome. I really look forward to it. And I think that'll be another thing to be proud of. Getting to America would be a great thing. So it would be good to catch up then.
Perfect, man. Thanks, man. You enjoy the rest of your day. I know it's night there. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Will do. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for your time.
Take care, man.